Imagine you are a Roman merchant in 250 AD. You have spent your entire life building wealth. Every denarius you earned, you saved. Your father did the same. 3 generations of discipline, sacrifice, and careful planning, all stored in silver coins you keep locked away for your family's future. Then, within a single generation, it all becomes worthless. Not because barbarians invaded, not because of plague or war, but because your own government, the empire you trusted, quietly destroyed your money while telling you everything was fine. That man could be you. And here's the terrifying part. The playbook is identical. Everything you were taught about Rome's fall is a lie. Barbarians at the gate, moral decay, lead pipes. These are convenient distractions from the real cause, economic suicide by deliberate policy. The same policy is being implemented right now in your economy with your money. By the end of this video, you will understand a pattern that 99% of people will never see until it destroys them. You will recognize warning signs hiding in plain sight. And you will know exactly what the wealthy are quietly doing to protect themselves. The signs today are not just similar to Rome. By several critical metrics, we are further along the collapse timeline than Rome was at its point of no return. The clock is already ticking. Think back to what you learned about the fall of Rome. If your education was anything like most, you got a simple story. Barbarian tribes invaded. Romans became lazy and decadent. The empire grew too large to manage. Eventually, it just sort of fell apart. This version is comfortable. It suggests collapse happens to others because of their moral failures or external enemies. It lets us believe that we would see it coming, that we are different. But this version is also a carefully constructed distraction from the truth. What you were told, Rome fell because of barbarian invasions. What actually happened? Those barbarians walked through an open door. The economic foundation had already rotted away decades before a single Goth crossed the frontier. The legions that once held the borders could no longer be paid. The merchants who once supplied the cities had fled. The currency that once facilitated trade had become worthless metal. What you were told, Rome declined due to moral decay and weak leadership. What actually happened? The moral decay was a symptom, not a cause. When money loses meaning, when savings evaporate, when honest work cannot provide for a family, society fractures. People stop believing in institutions. They stop trusting each other. They stop investing in the future. Here's the pattern you need to understand. Empires never fall from the outside until they have already been hollowed out from within. And that hollowing is almost always economic. It is almost always about money. It is almost always about the same sequence of decisions that seem reasonable in isolation but prove catastrophic in combination. The barbarians did not destroy Rome. Rome destroyed itself. The barbarians simply collected the pieces. And this matters urgently right now because we're about to perform an economic autopsy on Rome, to examine the true cause of death. What we find will be uncomfortably familiar. When historians examine a collapsed civilization, they look for patterns. In Rome's case, the pattern is unmistakable. 3 forces combined to destroy the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen: monetary collapse, unsustainable government expansion, and the erosion of productive capacity. Let us start with the money. Under Augustus, the founder of the empire, the Roman denarius contained approximately 95% pure silver. It was real money, valuable, trusted, and stable. Commerce flourished. Savings held their value across generations. This was the foundation of Roman prosperity. By the late 3rd century, that same denarius contained less than 5% silver. The rest was base metal, a worthless token stamped with the emperor's face. This did not happen by accident. It happened because emperor after emperor discovered that reducing the silver content let them mint more coins. More coins meant more spending without raising taxes. It seemed like a miracle solution. Nero was the first to significantly debase the currency around 64 AD. He reduced the silver content by about 15% to fund his extravagant building projects after the Great Fire of Rome. At the time, few noticed. The coins still looked the same. The economy still functioned. The consequences would come later, but each emperor who followed faced the same temptation, and each gave in. The debasement accelerated through the 2nd century, then exploded during the 3rd. By the time Diocletian took power in 284 AD, the monetary system had effectively collapsed. Now consider government expansion. At its height, Rome maintained legions across 3 continents. It built roads, aqueducts, and monuments. It administered a vast bureaucracy and provided grain subsidies to urban populations. All of this cost money. Money that increasingly did not exist. The military alone consumed perhaps 70% of imperial revenue during crisis periods. Legionaries demanded payment in real value, not debased coins. When emperors could not pay, soldiers made new emperors. The 3rd century saw more than 20 emperors in 50 years. Most were murdered by their own troops. Finally, productive capacity eroded. Early Rome produced goods, grew food, and created value. Late Rome consumed what others made. Grain came from Egypt. Luxury goods came from the East. The empire imported more than it exported, bleeding wealth with every transaction. Diocletian's response was telling. In 301 AD, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, attempting to control inflation by law. He mandated death penalties for merchants who charged too much. The result was catastrophic. Goods disappeared from markets. Merchants fled cities. Commerce collapsed entirely in many regions. The Romans living through this did not see a collapse, and they saw individual policies that seemed necessary at the time. They saw a currency that still had the emperor's face. They saw an empire that still appeared magnificent. By the time the pattern became undeniable, it was far too late. This same pattern has repeated throughout history, and most people never recognize it until they are already victims. Of all the forces that killed Rome, one stands above the rest, the systematic destruction of the currency. This was not a side effect of decline, it was the primary cause. And the mechanism is so important that we need to understand it completely, because it is happening again. Here's how it worked. An emperor faces a problem. He needs money to pay the legions, fund a war, or distribute bread to restless urban populations. Raising taxes is politically dangerous. Cutting spending is even worse. But there's a third option, a magic trick that seems to create money from nothing. He orders the mints to reduce the silver content of the denarius by just a small percentage. Instead of 100 coins from a pound of silver, the mint now produces 110. The emperor has 10% more money to spend. No one raises taxes. No one notices the slightly lighter coins. Problem solved. Except it is not solved. It is merely postponed. Those extra coins enter circulation. More money chasing the same goods means prices gradually rise. The soldiers demand higher pay. The grain merchants raise prices. The emperor faces the same funding problem, now slightly worse. The solution? Another small debasement, another temporary fix, another step toward catastrophe. This is the addiction cycle of monetary debasement. Initial success breeds dependence. The fix requires ever larger doses. Each intervention creates the conditions requiring the next. By the 3rd century, emperors were not reducing silver content by 5 or 10%. They were minting coins that were essentially bronze with a silver wash, worthless tokens that everyone was forced to accept by law. Prices responded accordingly. Historical records suggest inflation exceeded 1,000% in some regions during the crisis of the 3rd century. Think about what that means. A family that saved enough to live comfortably for 10 years suddenly could not afford 10 months. A merchant who priced goods in the morning found his profits worthless by evening. An entire economic system built on trust and stable money simply stopped functioning. The human cost was staggering. Small farmers could not afford seeds for the next planting. Merchants abandoned cities for rural self-sufficiency. Skilled craftsmen stopped producing goods no one could afford to buy. The middle class, the engine of any healthy economy, was systematically destroyed. And through it all, Romans were told their currency was strong. Coins still bore imperial portraits. Laws still mandated their acceptance. The government insisted everything was under control while savings melted away in citizens' hands. Sound familiar? It should. Modern economists have a name for this phenomenon. They call it monetary expansion, quantitative easing, inflation targeting. The vocabulary changes. The mechanism does not, and they are watching it happen right now. Now we leave ancient Rome and enter uncomfortable territory, because the parallels between Rome's collapse and our current economic situation are not vague historical metaphors. They are precise, measurable, and terrifying in their similarity. Let us start with currency debasement. Since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the United States dollar has lost over 97% of its purchasing power. What cost $1 then costs more than $30 now. That is not growth. That is systematic destruction of the currency's value, executed gradually enough that each generation accepts the new normal. But the pace is accelerating. In 2020 alone, the M2 money supply, the total amount of dollars in circulation, increased by over 25%. More dollars were created in a single year than in the first 2 centuries of American history combined. Rome took 3 centuries to destroy its currency. We are on a faster track. Consider government spending. The United States national debt now exceeds $34 trillion. Unfunded liabilities, promises made for Social Security, Medicare, and pensions that have no funding source, exceed $150 trillion by some estimates. The debt to GDP ratio approaches levels not seen since World War II, and it is climbing. Rome faced similar mathematics during its decline. The cost of military operations, bureaucratic administration, and public distributions exceeded revenue for decades. The difference was covered by currency debasement, exactly as we cover our deficits, through money creation and borrowing. Now look at trade imbalances. Late Rome imported grain from Egypt, luxury goods from the East, and manufactured items from more productive regions. The empire consumed more than it produced, bleeding gold and silver to trading partners who accumulated Roman wealth. Today, the United States runs persistent trade deficits exceeding $800 billion annually. We import more than we export. We consume more than we produce. Foreign nations accumulate dollar reserves while American manufacturing capacity hollows out. The parallel is not approximate, it is exact. Military overreach completes the picture. Rome maintained legions across 3 continents at staggering expense. The United States maintains over 750 military bases in more than 80 countries. Defense spending consumes hundreds of billions annually, resources that cannot fund domestic production, infrastructure, or savings. Most people dismiss these comparisons as alarmist exaggeration. They point to technology, modern financial systems, and American exceptionalism. They insist that this time is different. But when you overlay the numbers, the currency debasement percentages, the debt ratios, the trade imbalances, the military expenditure as a percentage of productive capacity, the pattern is not just similar to Rome, it is identical. And by several metrics, we are further along the curve than Rome was at the same point in its decline. The crisis of the 3rd century began approximately 250 years after Augustus. The current monetary system is barely 100 years old, and the mathematics are already more extreme. The question is not whether the pattern repeats. The question is whether you will see it in time. If you know what to look for, the warning signs are everywhere. They are not hidden. They are not secret. They are simply ignored by a public trained to trust official narratives and a media incentivized to maintain confidence. Start with inflation. Not the reported number, but reality. The official consumer price index tells us inflation is moderate and controlled. But ask anyone who has purchased a house, paid for healthcare, funded a college education, or simply bought groceries. The official statistics do not match lived experience. Housing costs have risen 300% in many markets since 2000. Healthcare expenses have increased even faster. College tuition has outpaced inflation for 4 decades straight. This gap between reported and real inflation mirrors Rome's experience precisely. Emperors insisted the currency was sound. Merchants knew the truth. The disconnect between official narrative and economic reality is a classic warning sign of monetary distress. Wealth concentration offers another signal. The top 1% of Americans now control more wealth than the entire middle class combined. This concentration approaches levels not seen since the Roman aristocracy absorbed the productive assets of a collapsing empire. When wealth flows upward during currency debasement, which it always does, it indicates the transfer mechanism is already operating. Institutional decay accelerates. Trust in government, media, financial institutions, and experts has collapsed across every demographic. This is not merely a political phenomenon. It reflects accurate perception that institutions no longer serve the populations they claim to represent. Rome experienced identical erosion. Citizens stopped believing in the empire long before the empire fell. The modern equivalent of bread and circuses warrants attention. Transfer payments now constitute a larger percentage of GDP than at any point in American history. More citizens depend on government support than ever before. This dependency creates political dynamics that make reform impossible, just as Roman grain distributions became politically untouchable even as they bankrupted the treasury. Finally, watch the capital flight indicators. Billionaires are acquiring second citizenships at record rates. Corporations move headquarters to more favorable jurisdictions. Family offices increase allocations to non-dollar assets. Central banks worldwide are accumulating gold at the fastest pace in decades. On the surface, everything appears normal. Stock markets reach all-time highs. Official unemployment remains low. The machinery of commerce continues functioning. But underneath, the foundation is cracking, exactly as it did in Rome during the apparent prosperity of the early 3rd century. Just years before total collapse, Romans enjoyed games at the Colosseum, bread distributions continued, and life seemed stable. These are the signs the wealthy watch, and they are acting on them, quietly, deliberately, and urgently. There's a reliable way to determine what wealthy, connected, and informed investors truly believe about the future. Ignore what they say, watch what they do, and what they are doing should concern you. Central banks worldwide have been accumulating gold at the fastest pace in decades. This is not speculation or conspiracy theory. It is documented in public reports from the World Gold Council and central bank disclosures. China, Russia, India, Turkey, and dozens of other nations are converting dollar reserves into physical gold. They are not doing this for jewelry. They are hedging against the currency system they publicly support. Billionaire investors, the names you recognize from financial headlines, have been quietly repositioning. They are buying farmland. Bill Gates has become the largest private owner of American farmland. They are acquiring commodities, real estate in stable jurisdictions, and businesses that produce essential goods. They are converting paper wealth into tangible assets. Family offices, which manage wealth for the ultra-rich, report shifting allocations away from traditional stock and bond portfolios. They are increasing exposure to real assets, alternative investments, and non-dollar denominated holdings. These are not retail investors following tips. These are professionals whose sole purpose is preserving generational wealth. Large corporations provide another signal. Cash holdings at major companies have reached record levels. Simultaneously, many are executing massive share buybacks, converting liquid assets into ownership stakes. They are reducing dollar exposure while increasing claims on real productive capacity. The pattern is unmistakable. While mainstream financial media tells you to stay the course, buy the dip, and trust the system, the people with the most to lose are hedging against the very system they publicly endorse. They appear on television praising the economy while their accountants move assets offshore. This is not hypocrisy. It is rational response to visible risk. They see what the data shows, they understand historical patterns, and they are acting accordingly. The question you should ask, if the system is sound, why are its greatest beneficiaries preparing for its failure? So what exactly are they preparing for? And when does the next phase begin? There is a dangerous myth about civilizational collapse, that it happens gradually, visibly, with adequate warning for reasonable people to adjust. This myth is comforting. It is also false. Empires do not decline in straight lines. They appear stable until suddenly they are not. The collapse, when it comes, is shockingly fast. Rome provides the template. For decades, the empire experienced slow degradation. Currency lost value incrementally. Institutions weakened gradually. Trade imbalances accumulated yearly. None of these trends appeared catastrophic in isolation. Life continued. Commerce functioned. Romans adapted to each small deterioration. Then came the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 AD, just 50 years, Rome experienced more than 20 emperors, most murdered. Civil wars fractured the empire. Plague killed millions. Hyperinflation destroyed the monetary system. Entire regions broke away. The imperial machinery simply stopped functioning in many areas. This was not gradual. This was phase transition, the moment when accumulated pressures exceeded the system's capacity to absorb them. One day the empire worked, then it did not. The lesson is critical. Confidence is the foundation of complex economic systems. Currency has value because people believe it has value. Debts are serviceable because lenders believe they will be repaid. Commerce functions because participants trust counterparties to fulfill obligations. When confidence breaks, it breaks quickly, and it does not break gradually. Today's system contains vulnerabilities Rome never imagined. The petrodollar system requires continued foreign demand for dollars. Treasury markets assume perpetual liquidity. Derivatives. Exposure exceeds $1 quadrillion notionally, a house of cards built on counterparty confidence. Global supply chains require continuous function across dozens of nations. What happens when confidence cracks? Currency instability, rapid inflation as money velocity increases, supply disruptions as trade relationships fracture, political fragmentation as populations demand solutions that do not exist. Rome's citizens did not get a warning. One day, their world simply stopped working. The currency they held became worthless. The legions that protected them demanded payment they could not provide. The merchants who supplied them vanished. The question is not if this pattern repeats. History shows that it always does. The question is whether you will be positioned before it happens or scrambling after. Let us make this personal. Because understanding historical patterns intellectually is worthless unless you recognize what they mean for your specific situation. If you are holding most of your wealth in dollars in a bank account, in a 401k tied to stock and bond markets, in a pension promised by an institution, you are playing the same game Roman citizens played. You are trusting the same type of promises they trusted. And you know how that ended. Currency debasement does not destroy wealth. This is the critical insight most people miss. It transfers wealth from those who hold debased currency to those who hold real assets, from savers to debtors, from the uninformed to the positioned. When Rome debased its currency, the losers were ordinary citizens who saved in denarii. Their life's work, stored in coins, became worthless. But the winners were those who had converted savings into land, productive property, and commodities. They emerged from the crisis with their wealth intact, while their neighbors were destroyed. The mechanism is identical today. Your savings account pays interest below the real inflation rate. Every year, your purchasing power declines. Your retirement accounts are denominated in dollars that buy less each year. Your future is tied to promises made by institutions following the same patterns that destroyed Rome. Consider a Roman family in 250 AD. They had saved diligently in silver coins. Their neighbors had purchased farmland outside the city. When the crisis of the 3rd century struck, the savers were wiped out. The landowners survived, fed their families from their own production, and emerged from chaos with their wealth intact. Two families, same circumstances, opposite outcomes. The only difference was how they stored their wealth. This is not about fear. Fear paralyzes. This is about seeing clearly. The same forces that erased middle-class wealth in Rome are active today, operating through the same mechanisms, following the same patterns, producing the same transfers from the unprepared to the positioned. The only question is whether you will see it in time.